Good morning. I am Karen Weber, and I am the Theology of the Body consultant for the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I have been studying theology of the body for the last 10 years and want to tell you a little bit about my journey, a little bit about what you can do in the classroom now, and to encourage you that you are actually learning this year. You are not responsible for teaching it. But there are a few things that you can keep in mind to start building the atmosphere for theology of the body in your classrooms. Why theology of the body? Well, the biggest reason that I got involved in theology of the body is because I had a lot of personal wounds in my background. I was a child of divorce. I am a child of divorce. And my marriage fell apart when my children were in high school. Add to that, alcoholic family, fatherless family, not involved in real communication in our family. And I learned skills that were good in some ways, survival skills, but they also were detrimental to my emotional and spiritual health. By the grace of God, I always felt very drawn to God and to the faith, and that helped me. So in the early 2000s, when I'm going through my own divorce, I realized that there was something out there called theology of the body. And I had started to understand the teachings of Pope John Paul, but I had not read anything by him really, and I was very much a learner still. And so the theology of the body kept coming across my path over and over again. And so I started looking into it. It took me a couple years before I went to my first Theology of the Body course in Philadelphia at the Theology of the Body Institute. Christopher West started this institute because theology of the body grabbed hold of him when he was 25 and changed his life from a life in the gutter, as he says, to a life of making sure that we all understood this profound teaching of Pope John Paul. So as an elementary school teacher, I went into Theology of the Body class number 1 thinking I will just take a couple classes and then I will be able to teach this. The truth is, I had no idea the depth and breadth of what theology of the body meant. I was overwhelmed both by the density of the content, but also by the personal wounds that came to the surface. And I realized quickly that even though I was in love with it, I needed to take my time and make this more of a retreat. So over those years, I went ahead and I took 8 classes and became a certification student. And each time treated it as a retreat as well as an academic study. So let me go back then from that experience of why I got into it to what it's all about. Theology of the Body was written as an answer to Humanae Vitae, in support of Humanae Vitae, written by Pope Paul VI. Pope John Paul II was involved with Vatican II. He was involved with Pope Paul VI, and he saw this cultural chaos coming down the pike. He had already suffered so much, as you're learning in your Theology of the Body lessons weekly, from communism, from losing his entire family, from growing up in such an effort to squeeze God out of society. That life experience helped him realize that we need to prepare for that in our Christian culture, which was quickly not becoming Christian anymore. It's quickly becoming secular. So before he was ever Pope, he wrote Theology of the Body it wasn't published like that, but when he became Pope, he started giving Wednesday audiences to give a defense of the human person and to reclaim the dignity of the human person. What developed then, and back to why we're doing Theology of the Body in our schools, is that he combined three major trains of thought. He was a philosopher studying about what it meant to be human. He's a theologian studying about God. But because of his life and spirit and experience, he also knew that the actual human experience was very important to the academic study. And that's where it comes into what lay people can learn and what we can live out to reclaim our culture. So this was called personalism. So he combined philosophy and theology with life experience, and it's deemed personalism, where he really valued how this is actually lived out in real life. Had lots of relationships with young people, with young married people, with people preparing for marriage. So he knew that the answer to the cultural crisis was really a reclaiming of marriage and the dignity of, should I say, not just the dignity of the person, but the dignity of living the way God intended us to live. And he did this by over many years by going back to the very beginning. And the very beginning was a study of Genesis. And if you really look at Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, you can see God's plan before the fall. And this was very important for Pope John Paul to get everybody. He knew this would be someday given out to the masses, not just written for priests, not just for theologians, not just in academic studies. But this is a message we all needed to hear. Secularism was quickly telling us that science was everything and that God was pushed to the side. God was unimportant. It didn't matter what you believed, that it was all, science, science, science. And that had never been the case in history. So you think about the 1900s, this is all starting to happen, and Pope John Paul and Pope Paul VI and Pope John the 23rd, who was inspired to call Vatican II, they all were very prophetic. They saw this coming because they saw the mechanization of man and the utilitarianism where people were valued for what they did and not for who they were as people. So a lot of material, a lot of stuff to cover. So I'm just going to hit on some highlights and bring this around to why it's important for us to do in our classrooms and in our schools. It is an answer to the question of who am I, where did I come from, and why am I here? And some of us took the Baltimore Catechism, and we knew why we were made because we memorized it. We're made to know, love, and serve God. But the fact is that we forgot that, and we certainly forgot what it meant. So theology of the body for me has been a great eye-opener as to how can I answer those questions. And then as a teacher, my desire has always been to help others understand what God's role was in their life and how they could get closer to God.